You know, when you think about Vikings, especially the ones all over TV and movies these days, uh, one name just pops up again and again. Ragnar Lothbrok.
Oh, absolutely. He's become this massive figure, hasn't he? The ultimate Viking king, this sort of relentless conqueror, father of legends.
Exactly. That image is just so powerful. The fierce warrior, the cunning leader, fathering all these famous sons who basically redrew the map of England.
It really is the stuff of epic tales, which is, well, kind of the point, I suppose.
Right. And that's exactly where this deep dive comes in. We've got all these different sources piled up here, the old Icelandic sagas, some drier historical chronicles, modern takes too, and we really need to dig into them.
Figure out what's what.
Yeah, figure out if this larger-than-life Ragnar is actually one single historical person we can point to, or if he's maybe someone else.
That's the big question, isn't it? Was there a real guy named Ragnar Lothbrok in the 9th century doing all these things? Or is the legend we know more of a construction, maybe a mashup of several different Viking leaders, their stories all woven together later on?
Precisely. So our mission today is to unpack these different accounts. Look at the stuff that sounds like pure myth. Look at the bits that seem more grounded in history, and try to understand who this Ragnar might have been.
And also, importantly, why his story, whether it's strictly true or not, ended up being so incredibly influential.
Okay, let's get started. Where do we begin?
Well, I think we have to start where the legend is most vivid. That means the Icelandic sagas and the big Scandinavian histories, things written, centuries after the Viking Age itself.
Like the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok.
Exactly. That one, the tale of Ragnar's sons, bits of Snorri Sturluson's Heimskringla, and also the Danish perspective from Saxo Grammaticus and his Gesa Danorum. These are the texts that give us that full-blown epic Ragnar.
And they paint quite a picture, don't they? Often presenting him as royalty, maybe son of a Swedish king, Sigurd Ring, though sometimes he's Danish.
Right. The details shift a bit depending on the source, but the core image is this charismatic, incredibly brave, almost supernaturally successful warrior.
And he gets that famous nickname, Lothbrok. Hairy Breeches or Shaggy Breeches, something like that.
Yeah, that's the one. The sagas give this great origin story for it. He apparently wore some kind of protective, furry trousers treated with pitch, maybe, to fight off a giant venomous snake or maybe a dragon, depending on the version.
All to win the hand of his first wife, Thora Borgerjord.
Exactly. And after she dies, he marries again, this time to Kraka, who's revealed later to be Aslog, the hidden daughter of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer and Brynhild the Valkyrie.
Wow, okay, so that weaves him even deeper into the mythological tapestry of the Norse world.
Absolutely. It connects him to these legendary heroes of the past. And it's through these wives, especially Aslog, that he supposedly fathers those sons.
The really famous ones.
The ones who definitely made their mark on history. Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Shipsirk, Sigurd Snake in the Eye. Ubi is often in there too. Plus a few others mentioned with Thora, like Eric and Agnar.
And it's this group of sons that becomes, well, kind of crucial when we try to link the legend back to actual history,
That's
right?
a key connection point, yeah. But sticking with the sagas for a moment, his exploits are just huge. Dragon slaying, as we mentioned, massive raids all over Europe.
Doesn't he raid really far north, like against the Jarmians and Finns? And maybe even towards Scythia?
The stories take him incredibly far afield, yeah. And then there's that almost foolhardy story of him trying to conquer England with just 2 ships.
Which predictably doesn't go well.
No, it leads directly to his capture and that incredibly famous death scene.
Ah, yes, the snake pit. Captured by King Ella of Northumbria, thrown into a pit full of vipers.
And the sagas add that little detail, don't they? That the snakes wouldn't bite him at first because he was just too great, too formidable.
It's such a perfectly Norse touch. Power radiating off him.
And that scene, his defiance in the face of death, leads us to another key text, the Krakomal, the Lay of Kraka.
Which is supposed to be his death song, right?
Yeah.
Recited from the snake pit.
That's how it's presented. He basically recounts his glorious life, all his battles, boasts about his victories, shows absolutely no fear of death, and actually sounds pretty excited about heading off to Valhalla.
He mentions Odin, the Valkyries coming for him.
Exactly. It completely seals his image as this heroic figure, deeply connected to the gods, fitting perfectly within that Norse mythological framework, a warrior welcoming his fate.
So the saga Ragnar is, he's almost a demigod. His ancestry, his wives, his deeds, his death, It all elevates him beyond just a normal historical figure.
Definitely. He embodies the Viking ideal, maybe even, some sources hint, descended from Odin himself. It's pure epic.
Okay, so that's the legend in all its glory. Now let's shift gears quite dramatically. What do the sources written closer to the 9th century actually tell us?
Right. And this is where things get, well, a lot murkier and much less like a grand saga narrative. We have to look at things like Frankish chronicles.
Okay, what do they say?
Well, accounts like the Annals of Bertiniani, the Annals of St. Bertin, they record a major Viking raid on Paris in 845. A really devastating attack, historically absolutely verified.
I'm a leader.
The leader is named as Ragnar Harris. Now, that's likely a Latin version of a Norse name like Ragnar or Ragnar.
So potentially our guy.
Potentially. The name fits, the event is real. But here's the catch. These contemporary Frankish sources, they don't say anything about him being called Lothbrok, they don't mention the famous sons, they don't link him to the later legends at all. They just record Ragnar Harris leading this specific raid.
So a possible connection based on the name and the event, but nothing definitive from the time.
Exactly. It's suggestive, but it's not a smoking gun, proving this Ragnar Harris is the Ragnar Lothbrok of the Sagas.
Interesting. Okay, what about other sources, maybe from England or Ireland? They dealt with Vikings a lot, too.
They certainly did. And this is where some intriguing, though slightly later, evidence pops up. If we look at the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and also Asser's Life of Alfred the Great, they talk extensively about the arrival of the Great Heathen Army in England around 866.
A massive Viking invasion force.
Huge. And crucially, they name its leaders, or at least some key leaders. They mention brothers called Hingwar and Hilfdin,
who historians generally agree are Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson.
Precisely. These guys are definitely historical figures active in England in the late 9th century. The Chronicle documents their campaigns.
Okay, so we have historical sons. Where does the father come in?
Well, there's a really fascinating detail in a slightly later source, the Annals of St. Neots, compiled in the early 12th century but using older material. It mentions the raven banner carried by this army.
The magical banner.
Yeah, supposedly woven by the sisters of Ivar and Halfdan, and it was said to predict victory. But the key part for us is that the annals say these sisters were the daughters of Lothbrok.
Ah, okay, that's a pretty direct link, isn't it? Connecting the historical Ivar and Halfdan to a father named Lothbrok, even if it's written down a bit later.
It's a very significant piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And then, if you look across the Irish Sea, you find something similar in the Irish annals. The Cogad Gedal Regalib, again 12th century but drawing on older traditions, refers to Halfdan, who died fighting in Ireland in 877, as Mac Ragnall.
Mac Ragnall.
Son of Ragnar. And Ragnar is widely accepted as the Irish form of the Norse name Ragnar.
Wow, okay. So let's recap the historical side. We have a possible Ragnar figure raiding Paris in 845 from Frankish sources. Then, a bit later, we have English and Irish sources explicitly linking historically verified figures Ivar, Halfdan, who are also named as Ragnar's sons in the sagas, to a father named Lothbrok or Ragnar Ragnall.
That's the state of play based on the near-contemporary or relatively early historical mentions. It's fragmented, it's not perfectly consistent, but there are these threads connecting the historical sons back to a father with that famous name or nickname.
Which brings us right back to the core debate, doesn't it? Was there one single historical Ragnar Lothbrok who did everything the sagas claim?
That's the million-dollar question, and honestly, modern historians are pretty divided on it. I think it's fair to say many, perhaps most, are skeptical about a single figure matching the saga description.
Why the skepticism?
Well, the sagas were written so long after the events, like 300, 400 years later. They're seen more as literature, entertainment, maybe even political propaganda from later eras, rather than accurate historical records of the 9th century.
So the idea is they took real events, real people, and wove them into a bigger story.
Exactly. They likely took the known historical reality, the existence of Ivar, Bjorn, Halfdan, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, the fact of the Great Heathen Army, maybe the Paris raid, and combined it with existing myths, folklore, heroic tropes, and perhaps stories about other Viking leaders, possibly also named Ragnar, and merged it all into this one epic biography.
So even if the specific stories about Ragnar the snake fight and the two-ship invasion, maybe even the snake pit death might be fictional or borrowed?
The existence of his most famous sons is not fiction. They are absolutely historical. And the Great Heathen Army they led was a major real event. An event that later sources, like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle implicitly and the Annals of St. Neots explicitly, connect back to revenge for a father named Lothbrok.
Which leads to that other big theory, the composite character idea.
Right. Could Ragnar Lothbrok be less of a single person and more of a, well, a legendary construct? A figure onto whom the deeds and stories of several different historical individuals were crafted?
Like maybe the Raging Harris who attacked Paris is one thread.
Possibly. Maybe elements from other powerful Danish figures of the era, like King Horik I or another king named Reginfred got mixed in, or that Ragnall figure mentioned in Ireland. It's a way to explain the chronological inconsistencies and the sheer scale of achievements attributed to one man in the sagas.
Or maybe Lothbrok wasn't even a personal name originally. Could it have been some kind of title or epithet given to successful warriors, perhaps?
That's another possibility scholars discuss. Shaggy breeches could have been a nickname applied to more than one person, or even become a sort of inherited title within a family or warband. It helps explain why the historical details are so hard to pin down to one specific life story.
Okay, so that's the composite theory. But I have to say, it's still pretty compelling that you have these specific historical sons, Ivar, Halfdan, etc., being linked across different, relatively early sources, English and Irish, back to a father called Ragnar or Lothbrok.
It is compelling. That tradition seems quite persistent and is supported by sources that, while not contemporary, are much closer to the events than the big Icelandic sagas. The Annals of St. Neots and the Irish Annals carry significant weight.
So maybe the truth is somewhere in between. Perhaps there was a historical figure named Ragnar, or maybe known as Lothbrok, who was the father of at least some of these famous sons.
In his own story, whatever it originally was, then became the kernel around which this much larger, much more fantastical legend grew over the centuries, attracting other stories and motifs along the way.
That feels plausible. A figure caught right in that fascinating space between verifiable history and powerful myth.
Perfectly put. And it's that blend, that very ambiguity that makes Ragnar's story so enduringly important, regardless of whether he was one man, many men, or something else entirely.
Why do you say that? Why does he still matter so much?
Well, first off, he serves as this potent symbol for the whole Viking Age, doesn't he? He embodies that ambition, the incredible daring, the seafaring prowess, that relentless quest for wealth, land, and glory through raiding and conquest that really defined that era.
Yeah, he's like the distilled essence of the Viking warrior spirit we read about.
Exactly, and his legend, especially as told in the sagas, really highlights the values that were central to that Viking warrior aristocracy. Things like the need for a strong, charismatic leader who could command loyalty.
The importance of martial skill, bravery in battle.
Absolutely. And also the practical side, securing plunder to reward your followers, the strength of kinship ties, family reputation, driving that expansion outward. You see echoes of these ideals in texts like the Havamal, the Norse wisdom poetry.
And you mentioned earlier how the legend actually influenced history.
Yes, this is crucial. The story of Ragnar's death at the hands of King Ella and the subsequent need for revenge became the explicit justification, at least according to later accounts, for the launching of the Great Heathen Army.
Which was a massive historical event that completely changed the course of English history.
Profoundly. So here you have a narrative, a legend, directly fueling a major military campaign. The story itself became a historical force. That's incredibly powerful.
Wow. And beyond that, direct impact.
Well, his story, preserved and retold in those sagas and poems, had a huge literary influence for centuries. And it's definitely played a role in shaping Scandinavian identity and how that period is remembered.
He also seems to bridge that gap between, like, the mortal world of warriors and the divine world of Odin and Valhalla.
He absolutely does. His legend reinforces that heroic status, that connection to the gods, which was something Viking warriors themselves aspired to. He becomes the ultimate example.
So, putting it all together then, looking at all these threads, the wild sagas, the scattered historical clues, the different interpretations, what's the final takeaway on Ragnar Lothbrok?
I think the takeaway is that he's this incredibly complex, fascinating figure precisely because he's woven from all those different threads. History, myth, legend, maybe multiple real lives. He's undeniably larger than life.
And his stories is just a fantastic example of how powerful narratives can be, isn't it?
Yeah.
How they can grab hold of the imagination, shape our understanding of the past, and even, as you said, directly impact historical events.
Definitely. He remains this absolutely captivating character who embodies so much about the Viking Age, and he reminds us just how much stories can make figures feel almost more real than reality itself.
It's a case where the legend really did take on a life of its own and became, in a way, a historical actor itself.
Which leads to a pretty interesting thought, doesn't it? If we accept that someone as iconic as Ragnar Lothbrok might actually be a composite figure, blending the stories of several real leaders, how does that change how you think about other great figures in history?
That's a really good question. Makes you wonder how many other legendary heroes or foundational figures from different cultures might also be these kinds of narrative constructs. People who came to embody the spirit or the achievements of a whole group distilled into one unforgettable name.
Something to definitely mull over, a thought to carry with you.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the tangled world of Ragnar Lothbrok. We really hope you enjoyed exploring all these layers, the history, the myth, the debate with us.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep questioning those stories, keep exploring the sources, and keep digging deeper into how we understand.